Your lecturer is Hannah B. Harvey. Dr. Harvey is a nationally known professional storyteller who holds a PhD in communication studies with a concentration in performance studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her energetic style brings to life humorous and compelling stories from the worlds of personal experience, oral history, folklore, and myth.
There were once two giants who threw stones and sand at each other. As Johnny said,
her written research has been honored by the American Folklore Society and featured in Storytelling Self Society, among other publications.
Belongs to the steel driving crew. He belongs to the steel driving crew. Welcome to the Children's Guide to Folklore and Wonder Tales. My name is Hannah Harvey. I'm a professional storyteller and a scholar of storytelling studies. And most importantly, I'm a mother of two young children who love to hear and tell stories. And we love to talk about the stories together, what was meaningful to us about the stories and why. This course is chock full of stories from lots of different cultures. You'll hear a wide variety of voices and accents and perspectives. Not just the German versions of stories, but stories from France, stories from Iran, tales from Kenya, whoppers from where I come from in the Appalachian Mountains, and from cultures all around the globe. And many of these stories are centuries old. And in that sense, they are survival stories. They're resilient, and they've lasted throughout the centuries for many reasons, mostly because they speak to us throughout our individual lives, when we're children, and through adulthood, and even into our elder years. These stories are more than just stories. They are a powerful tool of folk culture. Folk stories are the wells into which we humans pour our deepest anxieties and our desires, our hopes. And as problematic as they sometimes are, these stories continue to deeply resonate with us throughout our lives. Let's hear a story that touches on some of these lifelong themes. Sleeping Beauty was one of my favorite movies growing up. I would curl the ends of my hair to look like Princess Aurora, and I would sing to the birds and the deer. Later, when I became a storytelling scholar, I learned that the story that I grew up with wasn't the only version of Sleeping Beauty. It was the German version, recorded by the Brothers Grimm in the early 1800s. But the French version, there was a whole other second part of the story in the French version that I never knew about. And in the movie, the only remnant of that second part of the story was the name, Aurora, which, as we'll see, is actually the name of a very different character in that older French version, which was collected before the Grimm brothers by a man named Charles Perrault in 1697. But the first thing to know about folk tales and fairy tales is that in the beginning, they weren't written at all. They were tales told orally, aloud, by the folk, the common people, sitting around their fires talking, just like your family talks together and shares stories at the end of the day. The fairy tales that we read were told for hundreds of years before they were collected by people such as the Grimms or Perrault. Let's hear the first part of the French version. It's very similar to the German version, but you may recognize some parts of it, but there are a few twists. And as you listen, ask yourself, what parts of the story do you know? And which are parts of the story that other people never told you? And I'll give you a hint. Look out for the dwarf in this story. Pay attention to the prince as you listen too. In the end, does the prince really rescue the princess, as most of us remember in the story? Or does her rescue really have to do more with the fairy? And what's going on with the parents in this story? Why do they have to wait so long to have a baby? We rarely hear very much about them. And parents, as you watch at home, I want you to pay attention to the kids' reactions as we tell these stories together. Because as we've said, different parts of these stories reach us at different ages, and it's fascinating to watch. You'll see some parts where the kids are really drawn in, and the parents are just kind of going along with the story. And then you'll see parts where the kids are just kind of going along with the story. But the story has hit a chord with the adults in the room. It's fascinating, and it's an intentional part of this course that I don't want you to miss, because you can literally see these stories speaking to us at different ages and stages of life. Let's go to France for the first part of Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. Once upon a time, there was a king, but he put on your crown, and a queen, but he put on your circlet. And the king and the queen wanted one thing more than anything else in the world, and that was a baby. They couldn't have a baby. They tried and they tried. They couldn't have a baby. They prayed for a baby. Everybody prayed for a baby. They prayed for a baby. They went on pilgrimages for a baby. They went out and sought out healing waters. Everybody drink your healing waters. Nothing worked. Finally, the queen had a little baby girl. Oh, she loved that baby girl, and they were so excited. They invited everyone who they knew in that entire kingdom to the christening of the girl. All of the royal people, all the nobles, they invited all of the fairies that they knew of, all 7 of the fairies. And so everyone came to the christening, they came to the feast afterwards, and they had made special gifts for these fairies of the kingdom. They've set out beautiful golden plates with golden covers, and underneath each golden cover, everybody pull up your golden cover, was a delicious plate of food. And they had made 7 little boxes, golden boxes. And inside each of those golden boxes, everybody open your box. There was a little golden fork and a little golden knife and a little golden spoon, and they were all encrusted with diamonds and rubies. And so each of the fairies, they sat down at their places, and each of them opened their box, and they got out their little golden fork and their little golden knife, and they cut the food on their little golden plates, and they picked up their little golden spoon, and they ate up all the food. Well, after the feast, it was the tradition at the time that fairies would bestow a gift on people if the family had been kind to them. And so they'd been given these gifts. Well, the fairies came over, and they were about to bless this little baby girl when all of a sudden the door opened, and in hobbled an old fairy. And this old fairy had not been invited. And she was angry, and she hobbled inside. Well, the king and the queen, they didn't know she was still alive. It had been 50 years since they had seen that fairy, but they welcomed her in. They gave her food they had another golden plate brought out with a golden cover. Everybody pull up your cover. Oh, delicious food, but remember the gift. What gift have they given those 7 fairies? The golden box. They'd only made 7. There was no extra box of little golden fork and spoon and knife for that fairy, and she was angry. She ate her food. She came over, and the 7th fairy, she listened as that older fairy was grumbling as she ate her food. I want my golden box. I want my golden box. And after she had eaten, she walked over where the other fairies were standing by the young, sleeping baby. But the 7th fairy, she was wise. She hid herself away in the folds of the curtains to wait and watch what might happen with that older fairy. Well, soon enough, each of the fairies began to give a gift to that baby. The first gift that the fairy gave was beauty. The girl would be beautiful. The second gift that the 2nd fairy gave was wit. At this time period in France, wit was a combination of smarts, of intelligence, where you point to one side of your brain, intelligence, and humor. So she was smart, and she could make people laugh. And so she was given the gift of beauty. She was given the gift of wit. She could make people Laugh, not cough, laugh. She was given the gift of grace. She could move gracefully. She could dance. She could sing. She could play music. She was given each of these gifts by the sixth fairy, and then the old fairy spoke up. She said, yes. The girl, she will indeed have all of these gifts, but when the girl turns 16, she will prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel, and she will die. And she went hobbling out. Well, the king, everybody put on your crown, and the queen, everybody put on your circlet. Oh, they were so upset. This was their baby. She was only a few days old, and there she was. She was cursed. But the seventh fairy, where was she? Hiding. She came out. She said, I cannot undo this. I cannot undo the curse, but I can soften it. The girl, she will indeed grow up with grace and beauty. She will prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel, but she will not die. No, she will fall asleep. She will sleep for 100 years, and at the end of 100 years, she will wake up, and the son of a king will be there beside her. Well, the king and the queen, they were heartbroken. And they ordered that all of the spinning wheels in that kingdom be destroyed. And thinking that they were safe, they went on with their lives. And they forgot about the prophecy. And the girl grew up to be a young girl of 15. And then when her 16th birthday came, the king and the queen, they went out. They went out for the day. And the girl, she had to run of the palace. She was running around. She was dancing, laughing, playing music, singing. She was using all of her gifts. And finally, her curiosity got to her when she saw a door. She opened the door, and there was a part of the castle she hadn't explored yet. She went up into a tower. And there in a small room, she saw a woman. And it was a very nice woman. She was an older woman. She hadn't heard about that order from the king that all of the spinning wheels be destroyed. She was there and she was spinning. Everybody tap your foot. She was spinning. As she spun, she said, oh, you come. Would you like to try? Well, the girl, she was curious. She came over and she picked up everything, started to try to spin, but as she spun, she was very clumsy. She'd never done it before, and so she pricked her finger on that spindle, and immediately she fell fast asleep. Oh, the old woman, she didn't know what to do. This had never happened to her before. A princess had never fallen asleep before right on her, and she help, help! And so she called out. Oh, everyone came. The king and the queen, they came. Oh, her daughter. Oh, no. And they were heartbroken. And a dwarf who was living in that castle, he heard what had happened. And he put on these special boots. Everybody put on your boots. 1 boot, 2 boots. They were called 7-league boots because each of those boots with 1 stride would take you 7 leagues of distance. And so he put on those boots and he took 1 step. Take 1 step. And he crossed 7 leagues. He took another step and he crossed 7 more leagues. He took another step. And he had traveled 21 leagues to the place where that 7th good fairy lived. And he went and he told that 7th fairy that the prophecy had come true and that the princess had fallen asleep. And the 7th fairy, she was so upset she got into her chariot. It was pulled by dragons. And she traveled those 21 leagues back to the castle where the princess lay. And they'd taken the princess, they put her up on a bed that had silken sheets embroidered with gold. And she thought about that princess and how she would sleep for 100 years. And so she decided, she took out her wand, and she touched her wand to everyone in that castle except for the king and the queen. She touched that wand to the cook. And the cook, who was icing a cake, fell asleep right in the middle of icing the cake. She touched that wand to the undercooks, the sous chefs. And as she touched the wand to them, they were all chopping up the vegetables, and they fell asleep face first down in the chopped up onions. And she touched that wand to the butlers and the under-butlers, the governesses, everyone, except for the king and the queen. And the king and the queen, they kissed their daughter. And they left. They closed up the palace, and they ordered that no one should be around it. And the fairy had brambles, vines, trees that grew up all around that castle and covered it entirely. And 100 years passed. And after 100 years, who came riding up but the son of a king? And as he passed by that thick hedge of brambles and trees, he could see what he thought was the top turret of a castle, and he asked around. It had been so long, no one knew what was behind all those brambles. Oh, it is an ogre who lives in there. Was it an ogre? No. Oh, that castle, it is haunted. Was it really haunted? No. But one very old man, he said, I heard my grandfather once say that there is a princess who lives there, and that someday the son of a king will come and be by her when she wakes. And he said, but I am the son of a king. Perhaps it is me. And off he rode. And he cut his way through those brambles, through those trees, and he walked in and he saw all around that palace there were people who looked like they were dead. They were frozen in place, but now there was the flush of life in their cheeks. They weren't dead, they were sleeping. And he walked up the marble steps until he came to that bed with the silken sheets and the gold embroidery. He saw the girl, and he knelt by her knee. And when he knelt by her knee, it was the very moment of 100 years that had passed. And the girl, she opened her eyes, and she sat up. She looked around her, and there she was in clothes that were 100 years old. She looked around, she saw. Oh, so you are the prince. You have waited quite a long time to come. And they were married. Notice that the prince doesn't wake her up in this story. The fairy says she will wake up on her own and at the right time, and there he will be for her at the right time. This is what I hope for my children. Not that they'll be rescued by someone else, but that at the right time, their eyes will be opened and they will finally see the one they're meant to be with. Now, that's something I didn't think about when I was a child hearing this story, but it's a very engaging and interesting part of the story for me now, at this point in my life. The meanings of folktales change the older we get, and the stories that continue are the ones rich enough to provide layers of meaning and depth with our tellings throughout our lives. Let's talk about this for a moment with my friend, child psychiatrist Dr. Gila Kiyum, from Yale University's Medical School and Department of Psychiatry. Can you speak to how stories can reach us for both children and adults?
I think stories, and particularly fairy tales, mean something different to us no matter what age we're listening to. And it's based on our cognitive development, it's based on our emotional development, on our life experiences. It's almost like you're looking at the same story through a different lens every time. And how you interpret that story and what it means to you would be different. So if I were to think of a very young child who's listening to a story, the challenges at that time are emotional regulation, channeling your disruptive urges, and the story creates a wonderful place for us to be able to explore them and have an outlet for that aggression. For an older child, it's all about doing things. It's about mastery and competence. And stories have a wonderful way of showing trials and tribulations and how that leads to success. And the older child can learn about resilience and mastery and gaining control, which is what school age is about. Adolescents, on the other hand, and this is my favorite, are all about identity formation. Who are they? Where do they fit in the world? How will they become who they're meant to become? And fairy tales follow this wonderful journey that through all the challenges that somebody undergoes, they evolve. It is a journey. Sometimes it may be outwardly directed, but it is a journey of self-discovery. Who are you at the end of the journey? And then probably another journey will start. But at the end of it, you are more independent, you're autonomous, you're more competent. And that's what is supposed to be developed through adolescence. As adults, though, we're more focused towards finding meaning and purpose. What have we meant to the world? What has the world meant to us? What have we given? Have we been supported? Have we been supportive? Have we loved? Have we been loved? And that sort of generativity that is a task of this age, you see in a multitude of stories where it's about providing for the family, making sacrifices, undergoing these quests to save loved ones.
The words "once upon a time" take us into another world of fantasy and wonder, where characters do things that we can't do. The words "once upon a time" transport us into story time. This is a play world, and there are rules, and yet anything can happen. And in this play world, we work out a lot of very real issues. We discover and try out new roles. And sometimes the stories instill truths that we carry inside us throughout our lives. Fantasy matters to us because the deep work of imagining possibilities happens here. Stories circumnavigate rather than directly penetrate themes and questions. And in this way, they draw a circle around listeners of all ages and pull us closer to common understandings and to meanings and to each other, too. Let's hear the next part of this story, because in the German story, the princess and the prince, they're married, and that's the end. Or is it? For the rest of the story, we go back to the French version, because what the other versions of the story don't tell you is this. Their marriage had to be a secret. Because the prince, back home in his castle, while his father was a good king, everybody put on your crown, the father was a good king and a human being, his mother was an ogress. And that ogress liked to eat little girls. Ha 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 ha! And so he had to keep his princess a secret. And so every day he would ride out to see his wife. And they would be together during the day, and at night he would ride back home to his castle. And the king and his queen, the ogress, would say, "Where have you been all day?" "Oh, I was just visiting the woodcutter. He gave me a lovely piece of cheese to eat." And so every day he would ride out to see his wife, the princess, and every night he would ride back home. "Where have you been?" "Oh, the woodcutter, he has had a wonderful piece of cheese for me." This went on. And as they were married, they had children. They had 2 children in secret. They had a daughter who they named Dawn. And another name for Dawn is Aurora. And they had a son who they called Day. And so Dawn and Day and the princess, they lived in that castle in secret until one day the king, the prince's father, he fell ill and he died. He was very, very old. And that meant that the prince was now king. And he felt that he had the power and the authority enough that he could bring his princess back home. And that's just what he did. He took the princess and he took his 2 children, Aurora, Dawn, and Day, and back they rode. Back to his own kingdom. And he presented his wife and his 2 children to the kingdom. Everyone was so happy except for who? The ogress. Well, the ogress, she kept her feelings to herself. Until one day war broke out, and the war became so intense that the king, who was the prince, the king, now he had to ride out and lead his troops out into battle, and so off he rode, thinking that his princess and his daughter and son were safe back at home. But no, that very morning, the first day that he was gone, the ogress woke up. She said, I am hungry for breakfast. Cook, she called the cook over. I would like for you to bring me the little girl, Aurora. I will eat morning for breakfast with this sauce. Well, the cook didn't want to serve the little daughter to the ogress, but what could he do? He went over. Well, he couldn't do it. So he took that daughter. Everybody take the daughter. He took the daughter and he put her away into hiding, and he cooked up a lamb and gave the lamb to the ogress with this sauce. Lunchtime came, and the ogress, she was once again hungry. Cook, I need you to bring me Day. Bring me the little boy Day. Cook him up with this sauce. Well, the cook, do you think he really did it? No, he took the boy. Better take the boy. Took the boy and put the boy away into hiding. He cooked up another lamb and gave it to the ogress, and she ate it with this sauce. Evening came. And she turned to the cook. She said, I am hungry. Now you bring me the girl. You bring me the princess. I will eat her up for supper. With a sauce. Well, the cook, do you think he did it? No, he took the princess and he hid her away. He put her into hiding with dawn and with day. And away they hid. And the cook, he served up an entire half part of a deer, and the ogress ate it up with a sauce. And days passed. And the princess and the two children, they lived away in hiding in secret until one day, the boy, he had been given a time out and he had been naughty, and he was crying. And the ogress, she heard the crying boy from through the walls, and she knew, they have tricked me. And she called the cook. She brought out the princess and dawn and day, and she said, you have tricked me, and I will have you. And so she took a pot. She brought them all out into the square, and in front of all the people, she brought a big pot, or each pot. And she took every nasty thing she could think of. She took snakes, and she put that in the pot. Everybody take a snake, and she put that into the pot. And she took toads. She took toads. Everybody take a toad, and she put that into the pot. What else do you think she put in? Spiders. She took spiders. Everybody take spiders. She put those into the pot. Oh, everybody take the grossest thing you can think of. She put all that into the pot. Now I will put you into the pot. And so, just as the princess and her two children and the cook were about to be thrown into the pot, who do you think came riding in? Say it loud.
King.
The king came riding in, and he looked at her. What is happening? Well, the ogress, she was so upset at being found out that she started to hop. And she hopped, whoop, up and down. Everybody hop, whoop, up and down, whoop. And on the third hop, whoop, she herself hopped into that pot. And whatever was in that pot ate her up. And that was the end of the ogress. And the prince, who was now king, and his princess, and Dawn, Aurora, and Day, then they lived happily ever after. The end. The queen was an ogress? She wanted to eat the princess? The fate of the ogress in this story, it's an old story. The ogress suffers the fate herself that she had planned for others. She lands herself in her own pot of toads and snakes. We see this story part, or motif, in a long line of stories throughout history. Shakespeare included this motif in Act 3, Scene 4 of his play Hamlet, where a character is hoist by his own petard, or blown up by his own little container of gunpowder. It's Wile E. Coyote's fate in the old Roadrunner cartoons. Folklorists have found that the same story themes and with the same motifs or story parts, they recur across cultures and across time. And a system of classification was developed first by Finnish folklorist Anette Arn in 1910, and then it was refined by American folklorist Stith Thompson in 1928, and then it was further refined and diversified in 2004 to include stories beyond the European canon by German folklorist Hans-Jörg Uther. The Arn-Thompson-Uther classification system, they call it the ATU system. It groups all sleeping beauties under the tale type 410. And there are at least 22 different versions of this story across the world that fall under this tale type. And it's useful to hear different versions of these stories because they give us different roles for the heroes and the heroines. For example, in the first part of that story, both the princess and the prince are passive in the story. This first part of the story, the German version, it really has to do more with the parents and the fairies. They are the ones who act and make decisions. The children, the prince and the princess, they grow up, they have children of their own, and they live out the same sacrificial love that the first set of parents modeled. The prince defending his children by battling enemies away at the war, and the princess defends her children by battling enemies at home. It's this repeating cycle of nurturing and protecting, and eventually letting go of the ones we love. And the names of the children, Dawn and Day, they continue to cycle us into the future, into a new day, into our own stories with our own families. Like Sleeping Beauty, the stories in this course will grow with you and your families. They can become tales that you come back to and learn from differently at different stages of life. They're rich enough to provide guides and heroes and magical helpers for all of us at multiple points of life. At the end of many of these stories and our discussions about them, you may leave feeling as if, but there's so much more in these stories to talk about. Well, that's the goal, to spark conversations that will continue into your own families and friends as you tell more stories together. So, bring a friend or a spouse or a little one or just yourself. And let's begin together with a Norse story that combines Sleeping Beauty with Beauty and the Beast. And it's all about transformations.